It was just before dawn in late May 2012 when a light breeze drifted through the open fields of southeastern Iowa. A faint orange glow pressed against the horizon, and in the early stillness, most of the community slept soundly, the hum of distant farm machinery hours away from its morning chorus. On the outskirts of a small town, beyond a gravel road and tucked behind a well-kept lawn, stood a modest farmhouse. Two old farm hangars stood upon a wooden porch, the kind of rural home that, at first glance, would seem as ordinary and unremarkable as any other. Yet on this particular morning, a chilling silence would envelop that property and forever alter the lives of everyone who knew the couple who lived there. At approximately 5:55 a.m. on May 26, 2012, a frantic call came through to emergency dispatch. The voice on the other end, a young husband, sounded desperate and panicked as he reported an intruder and the shooting of his wife, who was sleeping in their bedroom just a short while earlier. The weather that day offered no immediate clue to tragedy. It was a mild morning, around 60 degrees, with a gentle breeze barely stirring the newly sprouted cornstalks that lined the roads. No rain, no thunder, just the subtle hush of a Midwestern spring morning. The first to arrive at the scene was a local sheriff's deputy, followed shortly by paramedics. They found a young woman named Lisa Techel lying gravely wounded in the couple's bedroom. She was still warm to the touch, but unresponsive. Attempts to revive her proved futile, and as the emergency team called in the coroner, the farmhouse and its surroundings quickly transformed from a private, quiet residence into a sealed-off crime scene. The perimeter tape fluttered gently in the breeze, and neighbors, now awakened by sirens and the ominous flurry of law enforcement activity, began to gather at a distance, their faces marked with confusion and fear. In the immediate aftermath, the young husband, Seth Techel, tearfully reiterated his claim of an intruder, suggesting an ongoing dispute with a neighbor. Law enforcement officers moved swiftly, knocking on doors, scanning the property, and securing the area. Investigators took initial statements from a handful of early-rising neighbors who had watched from their porches as emergency vehicles lined the quiet rural lane. Meanwhile, the coroner examined Lisa's body as gently as possible, noting the single gunshot wound. Within minutes, the small home was filled with the subdued, methodical energy of seasoned investigators, each step measured, each movement recorded. The morning sunlight grew stronger, casting long shadows on the farmhouse floor as they began their search for answers. Agency, Iowa, where the crime took place, is a community of just a few hundred residents. This corner of Wapello County is known for its fields of corn and soybeans, friendly smiles exchanged at the local cafe, and the rhythmic pace of farm life. Violent crime is exceptionally rare here, and the towns that dot the gently rolling landscape pride themselves on neighborly trust and safety. The previous year had seen only a handful of minor incidents, mostly petty theft, a few DUIs, and the occasional domestic dispute handled quietly behind closed doors. Most families had lived here for generations, their names etched into school plaques and church rolls. On this day, as the news of Lisa's death began to circulate, residents reacted with shock and disbelief. The Techel family, after all, was well regarded. Lisa was known as kind, hardworking, and compassionate. Her husband Seth, too, was familiar to many, and his family had notable ties to law enforcement in the region. The community had just recently been looking forward to the Memorial Day holiday weekend, a time of barbecues, family gatherings, and church services to honor fallen soldiers. Now, instead of festivity, a pall of confusion and grief settled over everyone. This quiet, peaceful place, where many still left doors unlocked at night, would struggle to make sense of what had just occurred. Within hours of the crime, farmers driving into town to pick up supplies would find themselves confronted by rumors spreading at the local diner. Passing through the main street, one would sense a tense hush, punctuated by the sight of the county sheriff's cruiser parked outside the hardware store as officers interviewed anyone who might have seen something. In this small Iowa community, the unthinkable had happened. A young pregnant wife had been killed in her own home, raising disturbing questions that no one was prepared to answer. Lisa Ann Caldwell was born in July of 1986 and raised not far from the very home where she met her untimely end. She grew up in a family that taught her the value of kindness, hard work, and an unshakable moral compass. Lisa's parents, both long-standing members of the community, encouraged her to explore her interests, instilling in her a quiet confidence and sense of purpose. As a child, Lisa loved to play outdoors, running through the tall grasses and helping with small tasks around family friends' farms. She was of average height, with warm, intelligent brown eyes and light brown hair that framed a gentle, welcoming face. Those who knew her recalled that she carried a quiet radiance, never the loudest voice in the room, but often the one people gravitated toward. After graduating from high school, where she had been a dependable and friendly presence in the choir and a steady contributor to community service projects, Lisa attended Indian Hills Community College. There, she pursued courses related to law enforcement, partly inspired by her father, who was a deputy sheriff, and partly out of a genuine desire to help others. Following community college, Lisa enrolled at Buena Vista University, working steadily toward her bachelor's degree. During these years, she also met and fell in love with Lisa Techel, a local boy with a similarly deep-rooted Midwestern background. They married in 2011, uniting not only their two families but two sets of dreams and ambitions. Professionally, Lisa set her sights on following in her father's footsteps in law enforcement. She had recently secured employment as a corrections officer at the county jail. Though the position came with its challenges, Lisa approached it with resilience and empathy. She hoped to eventually move beyond correctional work and perhaps become a deputy, or find another meaningful role in public service. Many remembered her for having a nurturing presence and a non-judgmental ear, qualities that would have served her well as a public servant. Outside of her career, Lisa's life achievements were smaller but no less significant. She tended carefully to the relationships around her, assisted with community fundraisers, took pride in her household tasks, and anticipated the arrival of her first child with a glowing sense of excitement. The pregnancy, not yet widely announced but known to close friends and family, filled her with a serene joy and a determination to build a loving family life in the little farmhouse that she and Seth called home. Lisa's social connections were as stable and warm as one would expect of a woman well respected in a close-knit community. Her parents adored their daughter and looked forward to becoming grandparents. She maintained a strong bond with her siblings, sharing inside jokes, holiday traditions, and a reliable system of mutual support. Lisa's friends came from all walks of life. Classmates from high school, fellow students from community college, colleagues at the county jail, and neighbors who had known her since childhood. She was deeply in love with her husband, Seth. They had met through overlapping social circles and shared a love of the outdoors, often taking drives through the countryside, attending local sporting events, and spending quiet evenings on the porch swing, talking about the future. While not overly present on social media, this was a time when Facebook and Twitter were familiar, but not everyone was perpetually online. Lisa maintained a modest online presence, sharing updates about her education, her job, and occasionally a photograph of her growing belly. Her friends recalled her dropping by unexpectedly with a plate of cookies, or texting at odd hours just to ask how someone's day had gone. There were also relationships formed at the county jail, professional friendships that might not have run deep but were founded on mutual respect and a sense of shared duty. Beyond that, Lisa participated in local church activities, took part in seasonal community fairs, and was known to volunteer at school events when asked. Her routine was simple. She rose early, worked a shift at the jail, returned home to handle household chores, spent time with family or friends, and never failed to call her parents at least once a week just to say hello. In the last few months of her life, as she and Seth prepared for the birth of their child, her circle grew tighter and more supportive. Friends and family started planning baby showers, neighbors dropped off hand-me-down cribs and quilts, and life seemed to be moving in a hopeful, forward direction. In the final 2 days before her death, Lisa's timeline was heartbreakingly ordinary. She worked a regular shift at the county jail, where she assisted with intake procedures and helped maintain order among inmates. Co-workers later recalled nothing unusual in her demeanor. She appeared calm, focused, and perhaps a bit tired, as pregnant women often are. After clocking out that day, she drove to the local grocery store, picking up a few essentials including fresh produce and a bottle of prenatal vitamins. Store camera footage confirmed her presence around 4:45 p.m., walking slowly but steadily through the aisles. She spoke briefly to a neighbor in the dairy section, mentioning her growing excitement about the baby. Later that evening, she texted a friend about meeting up for coffee the following week. Phone records show her last outgoing text at about 8:30 p.m., a quick note that simply read, "Can't wait to catch up." On the night before her death, Lisa spent most of her time at home. Witnesses driving by the farmhouse around dusk noticed the living room lights were on. Her father would later say they spoke briefly on the phone that evening. They discussed mundane matters. He had asked if she needed anything for the baby, and she had reassured him that everything was going smoothly. At some point, likely close to bedtime, Lisa took a prenatal supplement, as was her routine, and settled in for the night. There were no reported arguments, no known threats, and her credit card transactions and social media activity were minimal that day. She went to sleep in what should have been the safety of her own home, expecting to rise early, perhaps enjoy a quiet breakfast with Seth, and carry on with the small yet significant tasks of daily life. In the weeks leading up to her death, Lisa's state of mind was one of cautious optimism. She had faced some pressures, her job at the jail was demanding, and there had been the usual concerns about finances that come with starting a family. But nothing out of the ordinary. Lisa seemed happy, if occasionally fatigued. She had expressed excitement about the baby, discussing future names and nursery decorations with her mother. And they had both smiled. She was proud of her educational achievements and looked forward to what her career might hold. While the couple's finances were modest, there was no glaring hardship. Her conversations with friends indicated only minor worries, the kind that drift through the thoughts of any expectant parent. On the emotional front, her family remembered her being kind, steady, and not prone to emotional extremes. She looked forward to motherhood with a calm anticipation, and if there were any private doubts or fears, she shared them only in passing. Her professional situation, while not perfect, offered a stable income and a sense of purpose. She had not hinted at feeling threatened or endangered. In fact, the last substantial conversation her family could recall was about the new life she carried inside her. If she had known of any danger lurking, she gave no sign. On the other side of the equation stood Seth Techel, born in the late 1980s into a family deeply rooted in the Iowa community. Seth was of medium build, with a youthful face, and a demeanor that seemed friendly at a glance. He had grown up around these parts, knew the back roads and the best fishing spots, and was well acquainted with many families who had lived here for generations. Family history suggests a relatively stable upbringing, though not without the usual strains and complexities. His family was well respected, with several relatives working in local law enforcement, giving them a certain standing in the community. Seth attended local schools, participated in school sports, and was considered by many to be a fairly ordinary young man, quiet at times but generally polite and approachable. After high school, Seth attempted a few different career paths. He dabbled in local jobs, considering eventually a role in law enforcement or emergency services. He wasn't a star student, but he wasn't a dropout either. He hovered in the comfortable middle ground, never drawing too much attention. Financially, Seth's situation was modest. He and Lisa were not wealthy by any stretch, living on moderate salaries and occasionally getting help from their families. They resided in that small farmhouse a bit off the main road, managing their household expenses and looking to the future. Associates described Seth as someone who could be charming in conversation, but occasionally distant, as if harboring private anxieties or struggles he chose not to share openly. Psychologically, Seth's profile would become a key focus of investigators and experts attempting to understand what led to Lisa's tragic end. He had never been officially diagnosed with a mental health condition, at least none publicly recorded. However, some who knew him said he could be moody, prone to periods of withdrawal, and insecure about his place in the community. There were no official records of prior violent behavior. Yet interviews with certain individuals who had crossed paths with Seth in the months leading up to the murder hinted at frustration simmering just below the surface. He had expressed discontent about financial strains, uncertainty about his career trajectory, and stress related to the impending parenthood that would forever change his life. Some believed he might have felt overshadowed by Lisa's steady progress and the respect she garnered in their social circle. Others recalled an unusual tension that he sometimes displayed if conversations veered toward his responsibilities or the expectations placed upon him as a husband and soon-to-be father. As investigators later combed through psychological reports and consulted behavioral experts, they considered whether Seth had harbored resentment or fear he never voiced openly. Perhaps there were trigger events, arguments, disappointments, or perceived slights that never found their way into the public eye. While no psychiatrist had put Seth under formal evaluation before the murder, the nature of the crime and subsequent revelations about his life would prompt experts to piece together a profile, a young man who may have felt cornered by financial responsibilities, overshadowed by a well-loved spouse, and tempted by the allure of a different life, free from obligations. Community members, when asked in retrospect, described Seth's mental state as difficult to read. To some, he was the supportive husband and future father. To others, he seemed restless and distracted. Socially, Seth's persona was that of a young man still finding his footing. He had his circle of friends, some from high school, a few from community college, and others met through local activities. He was not a leading figure in community organizations, nor did he exhibit any unusual aggression or misbehavior at public gatherings. In fact, many in the community considered him likable, if a bit reserved. The farmhouse he shared with Lisa was their primary domain, a place where he spent more time than he did in town. He had a few acquaintances at the county jail through Lisa's work, though these were more polite nods than deep friendships. Seth's immediate living situation, small and modest, was not known to be tense or unhappy to outside observers. Yet, as investigators would later learn, appearances can be deceptive. Seth had been careful not to reveal any explicit warning signs, but a retrospective view showed subtle shifts. He made certain purchases and inquiries before the crime that might have gone unnoticed at the time, but later raised eyebrows. He had engaged in secretive communications, the details of which would surface only after investigators seized his phone records and combed through his digital footprint. His behavior in the weeks and days leading to the murder would become a critical puzzle for law enforcement to piece together. Ramsales. Some neighbors commented after the fact that Seth's behavior became a little erratic. He seemed edgy, kept unusual hours, and once appeared unusually flustered when asked a simple question about his weekend plans. He had no recorded history of previous crimes, but it emerged that he had shown interest in certain firearms and had taken steps to ensure he had access to one. As for surveillance, investigators later discovered he had conducted online searches for incriminating topics, as well as made vague references to life changes he anticipated soon. It would be this pattern of concealed intention, not clearly visible to the community, that formed the dark undercurrent beneath an otherwise placid exterior. In the days and weeks preceding the murder, subtle events hinted at looming tragedy. Seth's communication patterns shifted. Phone records revealed calls at odd hours to a woman not his wife, messages that stopped short of admitting infidelity but hinted at an emotional entanglement outside his marriage. He also began withdrawing cash in small increments, perhaps to avoid raising suspicion. None of this, however, would come to light until after Lisa's death. For Lisa, the 48 hours before the murder were marked by routine and hope. For Seth, they were characterized by tension, clandestine arrangements, and a sense of quiet resolve. Investigators would later theorize that something triggered Seth's violent act, maybe a conversation with Lisa that he feared would upend his plans, or an anticipation of fatherhood and responsibility he couldn't bear. Each clue, from online searches about firearms to a suspicious purchase at a sporting goods store, suggested careful, if clumsy, preparation. As May 25, 2012 gave way to May 26, the tension rose. That night, no neighbors reported shouting or fighting, but the silence itself took on a sinister quality in hindsight. By the early hours before dawn, while Lisa slept soundly, Seth was awake, his mind churning through dark calculations. He had read up on how to disguise evidence, how to shift blame, even how to handle questioning. He believed the ruse he planned, blaming a neighbor, a known figure with whom they'd had a dispute, would be enough to mislead investigators. It was a haphazard plan, but in Seth's mind, it might suffice. The farmhouse where the crime occurred was situated about 2 miles outside Agency, Iowa. Surrounded by fields and accessible by a gravel road, it had a screened front porch and neat flower beds that Lisa tended when the weather was mild. On the morning of the murder, the sun had not fully risen, leaving a dim light over the rolling fields. Access points to the home were limited. A front door, a back door leading to a small shed, and windows that were kept locked at night. Inside, the furniture was unassuming. A small living room with a couch and a recliner, a kitchen with dated but serviceable appliances, and a single bedroom that the couple shared. Weather conditions were calm and clear, allowing sound to carry well over the fields. Had anyone screamed, perhaps a neighbor might have heard. But only a single gunshot was reported, and even that was muffled enough not to rouse anyone but the perpetrator and the victim herself. The environment inside that bedroom around 5:50 a.m. was undisturbed except for the awful violence about to occur. Lisa, heavily pregnant, slept on her side. The lighting was dim, thick curtains subdued the early light, and a bedside lamp was turned off. Outside the bedroom door, the air would have carried the faint scent of coffee grounds from the kitchen and perhaps the mild odor of laundry soap from a recent load of clothes. The only other sounds might have been the distant hum of a refrigerator or the slight creaking of the old farmhouse settling. When Seth raised the weapon, the shotgun later recovered by investigators, he was careful but tense. The shot was fired at close range, a single devastating blast. The time from the trigger pull to the fatal impact was mere seconds. Immediately after, the house fell into a disturbed hush. Lisa didn't have a chance to cry out. Within minutes, Seth placed the emergency call. He sounded frantic, claiming he was in the shower when he heard a shot. He mentioned a neighbor with whom they had issues, trying to direct suspicion outward. First responders arriving swiftly found him distressed, hovering over his wife's lifeless form. The paramedics attempted resuscitation, but it was too late. The crime scene was tragic, yet eerily straightforward. No sign of forced entry, no footprints in the dew-laden grass outside, no shattered glass, no rummaged drawers. Investigators noted the suspicious neatness. Seth pointed out an open door, suggesting an intruder's escape. Officers stepped outside to check, but found nothing. It struck them as odd. Killers in break-ins usually leave some trace. In the immediate aftermath, Lisa's body was carefully examined. She had been shot once, a wound consistent with a close-range discharge from a shotgun. There was minimal blood spatter beyond the immediate area of impact, indicating a controlled action rather than a chaotic struggle. This was no haphazard burglary gone wrong. It seemed precise and personal. Paramedics and law enforcement, trained to expect trauma, still struggled with the emotional weight of what they found. A pregnant woman, well-liked and innocent, dead in her own bed. Outside, as the news spread, a subdued crowd of curious onlookers gathered at a distance, whispering and speculating. The media caught wind of the situation soon after, and by late morning a local news van would park near the property line, camera ready, awaiting official statements. Seth, meanwhile, paced and tried to stay composed. He repeated his story. He had been in the shower, heard a gunshot, rushed out and found Lisa. He claimed he saw a neighbor's figure fleeing. Investigators took his statement but pressed for details. Who was the neighbor? Why would he do this? Seth provided a name, a man known to have disagreements with the couple. While investigators made a cursory check, their attention quickly returned to Seth. Something about his demeanor, his tone, his timing, felt rehearsed. After leaving the scene, Seth's behavior began to shift. He tried to appear cooperative, yet kept subtly steering the narrative toward this supposed intruder. Forensic teams took over the farmhouse, searching for fibers, footprints, shell casings, and any sign of forced entry. Outside, they found none of the expected disturbances. Inside, they carefully cataloged every physical piece of evidence, noting the absence of signs that would support Seth's tale. Blood spatter analysis and ballistic tests suggested the shooter was not a random outsider, but someone close enough to know how to minimize mess and suspicion. Investigators also combed through Seth's digital footprint. What they found stunned them. Suggestive messages exchanged with another woman, internet searches about how to stage a home invasion, and inquiries about firearms and ballistic properties. Fingerprints on the firearm linked it directly to Seth. Neighbors, once calm, came forward with statements that contradicted Seth's timeline. The so-called suspect neighbor had a solid alibi and no motive. The puzzle pieces began to align, painting Seth not as a shocked widower, but as a cunning perpetrator. In the first 48 hours, investigators worked non-stop. Interviews were conducted back-to-back, evidence was sent to labs, and a timeline was meticulously reconstructed. Seth's claim of showering at the time of the shot was tested. Was the shower even running when officers arrived? Did he appear freshly washed? Forensics showed that the crime scene had been staged. The weapon belonged to Seth's household. He had easy access to it. Motive emerged from discovered communications. He seemed enamored with the idea of life without the burdens of fatherhood and marital responsibility. Perhaps he believed he could start anew with someone else, unshackled by the ties he had established with Lisa. DNA analysis confirmed no foreign intruder had left biological traces in the home. Fingerprints on the shotgun were solely from Seth and Lisa, the latter from routine handling, not firing. Cell phone towers placed Seth inside the home at the crucial moment. Expert testimony would later describe the wound pattern as consistent with a shot fired by someone standing in a controlled position near the bed, not an intruder firing erratically. As the case developed, law enforcement employed every tool at their disposal. Traditional policing combined with modern forensic science and digital forensics tightened the noose around Seth. By early June, rumors flew through town that Seth was not the grieving husband he claimed to be. The prosecutor's office readied for a high-profile trial. Seth's arrest followed, with charges of first-degree murder and the killing of his unborn child. Bail was set high, and as the community learned of his duplicity, shock gave way to anger. Lisa's family was devastated. The man they had welcomed as a son-in-law now stood accused of their daughter's murder. Pre-trial hearings focused on the evidence. The prosecution laid out a compelling argument: motive, means, opportunity, and a trail of digital clues pointing squarely at Seth. Defense attorneys scrambled to raise doubts, suggesting sloppy police work, a rushed conclusion. They floated the possibility of a second intruder, tried to introduce alternative explanations for the digital evidence, and questioned the chain of custody. But the prosecution's case was thorough. Fingerprints, ballistic tests, and digital footprints formed an unbreakable chain of logic. By the time the trial began, the media attention reached a fever pitch. The local courthouse, usually quiet, found itself the stage for a courtroom drama that would captivate the region. Prosecutors painted Seth as a man driven by selfish desires and an unwillingness to shoulder the responsibilities he had taken on. They highlighted his secret communications with another woman, demonstrating that he had contemplated leaving Lisa. They brought in forensic experts who mapped the angle of the shotgun blast, proving Lisa's killer had been close and deliberate. The jury listened intently as the prosecution showed timelines, text messages, and ballistic diagrams. The victim's pregnancy weighed heavily on everyone in that courtroom. This was not only the murder of a wife, but of an unborn child. The defense tried their best, questioning witnesses and experts, casting doubt on the reliability of certain lab results, and arguing that investigators had fixated too early on Seth, ignoring other possible suspects. They called character witnesses who described Seth as a kind husband who would never harm his wife. But the defense struggled to explain the damning digital evidence and the utter lack of any sign of forced entry, nor could they convincingly address the pointed forensic results. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated. The gravity of the case demanded careful consideration, but in the end, logic and evidence prevailed. The jury found Seth guilty, a verdict that brought a solemn hush to the courtroom. He was sentenced to a lengthy prison term without the possibility of parole. Outside, a crowd gathered, reporters jostled for statements, and Lisa's family quietly retreated, holding each other, still grappling with their loss. In the immediate aftermath of the verdict, the community responded with somber reflection. Memorial services for Lisa were held at a local church, where neighbors, friends, and colleagues came together in prayer and mourning. A small garden was dedicated in her memory outside the town hall, a place where people could place flowers or stand silently and remember the gentle, kind woman who had been taken from them. Safety measures were discussed, improved communication between neighbors, a renewed emphasis on conflict resolution, and perhaps more attention to warning signs within relationships. There was talk of supporting families touched by violence, offering counseling, and ensuring that resources were readily available to anyone feeling trapped or fearful in their home. For Lisa's family, the loss was unimaginable. They struggled with grief, anger, and a sense of betrayal. Over time, they sought healing through private counseling and community support groups. Local organizations banded together to provide emotional and financial assistance, helping them cover legal fees and memorial expenses. The media eventually moved on, but the family remained in the spotlight of memory and sympathy for a long time. They chose to focus their energy on remembering Lisa's life, not just the tragedy of her death. They established a small scholarship in her name at the local community college, aimed at helping students who wished to pursue careers in public service, much like Lisa had. On a larger scale, the case prompted law enforcement agencies in the region to refine their investigative techniques. Officers participated in advanced training sessions that focused on digital evidence collection, emphasizing that in the modern age, truth can be found in text messages, emails, and search histories. Prosecutors used this case as a reference point, teaching aspiring attorneys how to build airtight cases that rest on thorough evidence and clear timelines. The community learned a painful lesson. Evil can lurk behind familiar faces, and trust, once broken, is hard to restore. Town meetings addressed domestic violence and the importance of speaking up if something seems off. Churches and civic groups organized seminars about healthy relationships, mental health resources, and the importance of early intervention. As the years passed, Lisa's story became a touchstone in Iowa true crime history, often invoked to remind people that not all crimes come from strangers lurking in the shadows. Sometimes, the danger lies much closer to home. Law enforcement textbooks cited the investigative techniques employed in her case, while legal scholars discussed the trial's handling of digital forensics. Community leaders viewed the tragedy as a catalyst for reforms that would make such crimes less likely, or at least easier to detect, before it's too late. The farmhouse itself changed hands after the trial. New owners moved in, redoing the landscaping and repainting the exterior. Though no one could erase the memory of what happened inside those walls, time marched on. Over time, the legacy of Lisa's life, her kindness, her aspirations, and her spirit outshine the dark deed that ended it. In quiet corners of Agency, Iowa, people still speak her name with admiration. Friends remember the warmth of her smile and the gentleness of her manner. Some neighbors say they can still imagine her sitting on the porch, a soft breeze in her hair, dreaming of a future that should have been hers. In reflecting on this case, it's clear that violence sometimes emerges where it's least expected, casting a pall over whole communities. Yet, the community's resilience, their collective push for better support systems and more vigilant policing, stands as a testament to their strength. Lisa's life and death left an imprint that led to heightened awareness, improved response protocols, and a deeper appreciation for the small moments of kindness and honesty that hold communities together. The truth unearthed here wasn't easy or comforting, but it reinforced the vital importance of thorough investigation, fair trials, and the pursuit of justice, no matter how painful the path might be. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime stories. If you want to share your thoughts on this case or discuss similar cases, feel free to leave a comment below. And if you're interested in learning about other small-town tragedies that changed the course of history, we have more stories available. Each serves as a reminder that the truth, though sometimes elusive, can be uncovered with careful diligence, and that the silent secrets of small-town life sometimes hold the most impactful lessons.